Well, good morning. I want to read something to you that I read this summer that I just really appreciated. It's from a book called Life After God, which I imagine can be kind of a daunting title, but it's really just an invitation to experience God in new ways. And it's written by a Presbyterian pastor named Mark Feldmeyer. In that he's talking about power and God's power in particular, but he says there are two kinds of power that humans are most apt to wield in the world. The first is unilateral power, which is the ability to produce intended or desired effects in our relationships through influence, manipulation, or control to advance our purposes. Unilateral power is one-sided, one-directional, one-dimensional, non-relational in nature, and almost always diminishes or robs the agency of the other. He says the second kind of power is relational power, which is the capacity both to influence the other and to be influenced by the other. Relational power is grounded in mutuality, openness, responsiveness, persuasion, and interdependence. It involves both giving and receiving. So it's two different kinds of power that he talks about, the unilateral power and relational power. As I read that, I realized how often I think of God's power as unilateral power, that robs us of our agency, that is really kind of coercive and manipulative. It's about changing the other, and it's not mutual in nature. And how I've come to believe and come to realize that that's not the way that God chooses to interact with us. That's not the way that God chooses to influence the world. If we think about the person of Jesus and we think about the incarnation, that was not unilateral power. That was relational power. That was changing. It was meeting us on our terms. It was mutual. It was respectful. It didn't strip us of our agency, but invited us into a relationship, one of mutual change, one of mutual vulnerability. And it strikes me how often I choose to try to influence the world through the former of those two, through that unilateral power, rather than through the mutual power that's been revealed to us in the person of Jesus, and how important it is for all of us to, as we interact with other people, whether we disagree with them or agree with them, whether they look like us or they don't, whether they love like us or they don't, whatever it might be, what might it look like for us to engage in a kind of relational power that is mutually beneficial, that allows for both sides to grow and change, that requires that both sides be vulnerable with each other? What does that look like? And how can a church, how can a Christian, how can a person of faith, a follower of God, live that kind of power, which it seems to me, as I think about it, is actually a lot more influential and a lot more able to bring change and make the changes that are necessary than unilateral power will ever be. And how often we as Christians, choose kind of that unilateral power, like we're going to say, I've got the control, and I'm gonna make these changes and kind of strip other people of their agency. What if God doesn't want us to interact with the world in that manner of unilateral power, but instead would rather have us relate to the world in the way that God chooses to relate to the world, which is through relational power? Is there more possibility to influence through relational power than unilateral power? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not researched that. I couldn't tell you. But I do think that at the very least, I am more open to be changed when I choose to interact with the world in relational power than through that unilateral power.